Do not show up. You will ruin your mother's birthday." My father said, his voice so clean it cut. Thomas Stone stood in the Westlake Hills kitchen gripping a white envelope, the UTMA account statement with my name on it. He held it like proof that what was mine was his to manage. It was 3 days before my mother's party at Barton Creek evening heat, still in the air, the sink light too bright for a family conversation. Denise leaned on the island with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "No job title, no need to attend," she said. Bradley lifted his phone and smirked as if my life could be measured by the age of my car. Startup means long vacation. My mother sat at the table with her hands flat on the wood, gaze fixed on a salt shaker as if it could teach her how to stay still. I had brought a first edition for her birthday, wrapped neatly with a small note that said, "I am proud of you." I did not expect applause or a parade. I did not expect a door closed on my face by the people who taught me to knock. My father raised the envelope. This is what a parent does. I kept it safe. I made decisions. I heard what he did not say. "We took your money when you were young enough to be told it was for family and the story became convenient. Tonight, we will take something else. Your chair, your right to show up without explanation. Send the message he told my mother." She unlocked her phone. Her voice did not shake when she read it aloud. "Avery is not attending. We need to keep the evening simple." She did not look at me when she pressed send. Humiliation has a way of shrinking a room. It pushes the walls inward and steals the air. I looked at the slideshow draft propped open on the laptop and saw my college photo already dimmed. Denise slid my place card out of the stack with a small sweep of her fingers, as if correcting a print error. Bradley asked if anyone else thought my picture would confuse the country club crowd. The kitchen clock made a soft sound, a reminder that even ordinary seconds can carry a heavy load. I could have recited the number of clients we had signed this quarter. I could have held up a graph. I could have said what was about to happen to my company, how the city would soon learn my name. I did none of that. I set the wrapped book on the counter, the bow facing my mother. "For you," I said, "regardless." My father stepped between us. "Do not make a scene. Nobody is against you. We are managing appearances." The word appearances slid across the tile and stopped at my shoes. I picked up my phone and opened a list of household accounts that had once been convenient for everyone and never for me. A few taps. The shared entertainment logins signed out. The sound my phone made was almost cheerful. Denise blinked. Bradley frowned at his screen. I did not explain. I did not raise my voice. I said, "I understand," and the sentence tasted like metal. My mother whispered my name and stopped as if the rest of the sentence had been confiscated. "There is nothing else to discuss," my father said. He lifted the envelope again, and I remembered being 21 and told that family meant flexibility. Family is generous with warm words when it needs your consent. I took my keys from my bag. They felt heavy, familiar, honest. I placed my palm on the counter beside the book and left it there long enough to steady my breath. I did not argue about the slideshow, did not defend the car, did not try to reclaim the place card. I walked toward the door. "Leave the gift so it will not look like a grudge." Denise called. "It is not a grudge," I said. "It is respect." Bradley made a sound that wanted to be a laugh. My father told him to stop. My mother stood again, torn between the part of her that wanted to stand with me and the part that wanted the party to go smoothly. The porch light came on while we debated whether or not we were debating. I opened the door, and the evening air met my face with a calm that felt both generous and undeserved. Westlake Hills stretched quiet and green. I looked back once, not to memorize their faces, but to keep a record of the leaving. The envelope in my father's hand, the phone in my mother's, the small victory in Denise's smile, the practiced amusement in Bradley's eyes, the wrapped book waiting on the counter. I closed the door gently because dignity does not slam. On the porch, I looked at my keys under the clean light. I chose silence like a tool you reach for when you know the work will be long. some anger shouts. Mine saved its voice. I walked to my car with the kind of calm that arrives when you finally accept that the people you love have chosen an audience over you. I started the engine. The radio played an ordinary song that had nothing to do with any of us. I drove away without checking the mirror. 3 days would pass. Headlines would do what families sometimes cannot. They would listen. When I turned 21, my father told me the UTMA account he had opened in my name was being used for a short-term family investment. It was $42,700 that he said would grow if I trusted him. I signed the paper because at that age, trust still sounded like a promise, not a contract. A few months later, when I asked for the statement, he said it had been rolled into something temporary he did not mention, that temporary meant permanent for him and empty for me. I learned to stop asking. Austin was changing fast back then. Tech money rising like humidity. I was coding late nights with Maya Chen, a quiet genius from Dallas, who understood that silence was a kind of focus. We called our project Stone Metrics until the day I decided I no longer wanted my father's name on anything I built. We became Lumen Bridge, a light between 2 points. It felt like reclaiming breath. I paid my bills, skipped vacations, and built a product line. One small contract at a time, while he told relatives I was unemployed, experimenting with computers in a rented apartment. I heard his version of me through other people's polite smiles. One afternoon, the family phone plan renewed. I logged in and saw 3 auxiliary lines tagged under my account. Bradley's tablet, Denise's watch, my father's office phone all billed to me. I canceled them. The confirmation ping felt small but clean, a boundary made digital. That evening, he called to ask if the carrier was having issues. I told him no, just fixing an old oversight. The silence on the line was long enough to taste. 2 days later, Bradley sent $500 to my account with a note that said, "Hope this helps." He posted a screenshot on Facebook with the caption, "Taking care of my little sister." I saved it not for revenge yet, but for record keeping. Evidence always begins as memory. Lumen Bridge started attracting attention, a pilot with Dell, a small feature in the Austin Tech Journal. My father forwarded the article to my mother and wrote under it. Proud of her hobbies, she replied with a heart emoji. No words. Maya and I were working from a borrowed office near South Congress, our laptops on folding tables, and she said one night that family pride has an expiration date shorter than milk. I laughed, but it stuck. At home, they were hosting dinners where my name was left out of introductions, where Denise called me idealistic with that sweet smile that means useless, where my mother mentioned me only in the past tense. Every dollar I had was a quiet argument against their definition of success. I built spreadsheets tracking every cent from the old UTMA that should have been mine. I compared it to what I had earned and realized the difference was not money, but control. The injustice was no longer just theft. It was the rewrite of a story that still had my name on it. The next time we spoke, my father said I should be grateful that the money had taught me independence, and that if I had waited, he might have helped me start something. I said, "Thank you," he heard compliance. But what I meant was, thank you for teaching me that help is not the same as honesty. Every month after that, I sent myself an email titled, "Evidence, Small Notes about Things They Said or Did, Little Humiliations Disguised as Concern, Digital Footprints for a Storm that would eventually need witnesses." By the end of that year, when I saw Bradley bragging to our cousins about his new company car, I understood the pattern. They rewarded loyalty to silence. They punished difference. And in their system, I had already been written out. The more they tried to minimize me, the more the numbers grew, and numbers do not argue, they accumulate. I told Maya someday I would show them what accountability looked like. Without raising my voice, she said, "Make sure they can read the balance." I said they will. The night before the party, my father called it a planning dinner, but it felt more like an audit. The table in the Westlake dining room was set for 12 polished silver-printed menus. My mother moving like a shadow between kitchen and conversation, her smile trained to stay in place. The air already heavy with rehearsed politeness. Thomas cleared his throat as if about to deliver a sermon. He unrolled a paper from his jacket pocket, a list of guests printed neatly with company titles and affiliations. He tapped the paper with one finger and said that appearances mattered, that we had important people coming, that my presence might send mixed signals. He smiled thinly at me. "It is better if you sit this one out, Avery. We cannot risk confusion about what you actually do." Denise reached across the table and patted my mother's hand, assuring her that this was for the best, that I would understand. Bradley leaned back in his chair and said he did not want any awkward conversations about failed ventures. He chuckled the kind of laugh that announces hierarchy. My mother did not defend me. She looked down at her napkin and said, "Maybe next time the phrase used to soothe a child, not an adult." I nodded because any other reaction would have been wasted breath. My father went on describing who would sit where, which donors to greet first, how the slideshow would loop through family milestones. He told my mother to remove the older photos of me from her presentation. We should focus on achievements that fit the tone. He said tone the way bankers say risk. The projector light hummed against the far wall. My face faded from the frame as she clicked delete. I watched her hand tremble slightly before she steadied it on the mouse. The small act of erasure was louder than any insult could have been. Bradley poured himself another drink and asked if he could have my seat for his friend from the firm. My father agreed, instantly the deal complete. The room felt smaller, my pulse steady but cold humiliation, arriving not as noise but as quiet confirmation that I no longer belonged to their version of success. I excused myself to the kitchen, stood by the counter staring at the glow of the Wi-Fi router, a small blinking light in a house that did not know my name anymore. I opened the settings on my phone, renamed the network Not Your Maid, set a timer to power down at the exact hour their party would begin. It was petty, precise, and perfect. Maya texted me a reminder about our upcoming investor call. I sent back a photo of the dinner table, captioned "Stage Rehearsal." She replied with one word, "Survive." When I returned to the room, Denise was showing my father a draft of her social post promoting the event Family Success Runs Deep. She said he nodded approvingly. Later that night, the post went live with a line that said, "Some of us build legacies while others chase illusions." The photo attached was of her and Bradley clinking glasses beside the Stone family crest. I took a screenshot, labeled it Proof Number 12, and archived it. I could have replied, I could have posted my own counter-narrative, but quiet felt sharper. Quieter meant control. The next morning, my mother called to say she hoped I would not take it personally. She used the phrase "too much stress lately." She asked if I needed anything. I almost laughed. I told her no. Everything is perfectly balanced. She said that was good, that she was glad I was mature about it. Then she hung up quickly before guilt could form words. That afternoon, I sat by the window in my apartment laptop, open reviewing code, the city outside, humming with traffic and distant music from Zilker Park. I thought about how families like mine train you to measure worth through invitation lists, how absence is used as punishment, and how sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing the game. The router light blinked green on my desk. I smiled, imagining the moment tomorrow evening when all their devices would freeze mid-conversation. A brief silence served in return for the years of quiet they demanded from me. I checked social media once more. Denise's post had gathered likes and comments from relatives proud of you. Both great to see the Stones thriving. Nobody asked where I was. Absence can be rewritten too, as choice, as failure, as convenience. I added a new line to my evidence folder. Time stamped another thread in a web that would one day hold them still. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and let the anger settle into something clean. Not rage, not despair, but direction. A slow current under still water. Silence can look like defeat until it becomes strategy. A week after the party, I opened my inbox and saw my father's name in the forwarded line of a family chain. Email it began with cheerful greetings, then turned into something colder. He had written to every relative from Houston to Dallas that I was doing small computer tasks to make ends meet. Nothing serious, just keeping busy. He added that it was good, I had found something to occupy my time after so many false starts. The sentence landed like a quiet bruise, perfectly polite and perfectly cruel. I scrolled through the replies, cousins offering sympathy and aunts suggesting I apply for an office job. Nobody asked me directly if it was true. That is how family gossip works. It does not ask for your version, it just circulates. I sat in my office at Lumenbridge staring at the screen. Maya looked over and saw my face. She asked what happened. I turned the monitor toward her. She read the email once, then again. She said, "You know what to do." And I nodded calm. Not because it did not hurt, but because I had expected it. The difference between surprise and confirmation is exhaustion. Outside the windows of our workspace, the heat shimmered off the parking lot, the Dell building in Round Rock visible through the haze, a reminder that we were closer to validation than they could imagine. Our pilot program with Dell's Data Security Division was in the final review. Stage 50 corporate clients already signed, and still my father called it errands. I opened our accounting dashboard and saw the recurring charge for the Stone family wine subscription, an indulgent collection billed to my card since college. I canceled it. The email confirmation arrived with the subject line, "Your membership has been discontinued." I imagined the next delivery evening, the confusion, the irritation, small revenge served at room temperature. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Bradley. No words, just an image. It was me on a rented pedicab during the South by Southwest week, laptop in hand hair, tied back, captioned with a single emoji. The one laughing until tears in the family group chat. He wrote, "Apparently tech success means Uber for nerds." They all responded with hearts and thumbs. My mother sent a small facepalm icon as if embarrassment was her role. I saved the image quietly, named it Proof number 19, date stamped and archived, one more receipt for later truth. The irony was painful and perfect. The photo had been taken after a long investor meeting when my car broke down downtown. I had laughed with the driver about startup life being powered by caffeine. An irony. I did not know someone across the street had captured it. Now it was their entertainment. Maya said it was almost poetic that they used what they did not understand as mockery. She told me to keep the focus on the product. Let the work speak. I said the work will shout. We spent the week refining the AI module, adding new encryption layers, the contract drafts, coming in from Dell's legal department like small signals of justice. I printed one and pinned it on our corkboard. I liked seeing it there, a quiet promise of reversal. At night, I scrolled through social feeds and watched the small network of relatives share my father's email line by line, some quoting it as a family update, others laughing at the phrasing, none of them realizing that the company they dismissed was about to change our family's narrative permanently. The next morning, I received another message from my father, short and authoritative. He wrote, "Please remember to stay modest about whatever you are doing. We do not need more misunderstandings." I read it twice, then replied, "Thank you for your guidance. I will remain silent," the sentence both a promise and a prophecy. Maya joked that silence could be trademarked. We laughed until the weight lifted. Then she said someday they will email again, but the subject will be different. Something like, "Proud of our daughter, the entrepreneur," I said. By then, it will not matter. We will have built something that speaks louder than any apology. Still, part of me wanted to see his face when truth replaced rumor, not out of revenge, but to witness recognition, to see the line where arrogance turns to regret. As the week closed, I sent an anonymous tip from our company account to the same family email chain, a press release draft for our upcoming pilot launch, no name, no comment, just the headline about Dell partnership, the kind of subtle spark that starts a quiet fire. Then I closed my laptop, poured a glass of water, and let myself smile. Not the kind of smile you post, but the kind that belongs only to those who have been misnamed and keep building anyway. By the start of September, the tension had turned financial again, as it always did in our family. This time, it came in the form of a loan application. I was never meant to see a HELOC for $95,000 placed against my grandmother's house in Travis Heights, a property still under probate. After her passing, the document appeared in a shared drive, accidentally synced from my father's account. My name listed as a previous occupant, but not as an owner. Yet somehow my e-signature had been attached to the authorization page, pixelated and precise, copied from an old college form. It was the kind of violation that feels quiet but shakes you from the inside out. I stared at the screen long enough to memorize the font of my own forged name. I called the county clerk to confirm. The clerk said the papers had cleared initial review and that the funds were scheduled to disperse into a Stone family trust, a structure controlled by my father and Bradley. I thanked her calmly, my voice steady, even while my stomach felt hollow. It was not about the money alone. It was about the repetition. Every lesson I had already learned about control, repeating itself through paperwork. I drove through Travis Heights that afternoon, parked across from the old oak that still shaded my grandmother's porch. The for sale sign leaned against the railing, and for a moment I could hear her voice saying, "Don't let them decide what you're worth." I whispered, "I won't." Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and started compiling documents. Every transaction, every text screenshots of that HELOC file. I sent them to Alana Reed, a lawyer recommended by one of our investors. She replied within an hour, saying she'd seen this pattern before. Quiet family fraud dressed as trust. She told me to gather more proof before confronting them. Evidence, not emotion, would win. While she prepared a formal notice, I decided on a smaller strike of my own. I logged into my Amazon household account, the one that had served the entire Stone family for years. Free deliveries, shared lists, and endless add-ons that always charged back to me. I removed every member, deactivated the shared pantry orders, and saw that Denise had a standing monthly order labeled Paper Tower Mountain, enough paper towels to stock a restaurant. I canceled it, her next delivery date, coinciding perfectly with the birthday dinner planning. It was petty. It was mine. 2 days later, I received a message from her, polite and sharp. She said we might have a problem with catering. The vendor claimed that someone from my email had canceled the order. She included a screenshot of an email that looked doctored. I smiled and replied that I was certain she had it under control since the logs on my end showed no activity, which was true. Because I had downloaded the full server record as proof of her fabrication, she did not respond again. The story that reached my mother was that I had sabotaged the event. She called me, trembling with indignation, saying Bradley and Denise had to reorder food at the last minute. I listened, nodded to the silence, and thought about how convenient it was that they needed a scapegoat. I was a familiar role, easy to cast. That night, while Austin buzzed with Friday energy, I sat in the office with Maya. The contract with Dell finalized, the first payment scheduled. We were discussing hiring new developers when my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Bradley. He wrote, "Why are you doing this? You are family." 3 words that stung more than any insult in our house. Family was always the excuse for trespass. I stared at the message, then typed a reply and deleted it before sending silence again. Deliberate and heavy. I saved the screenshot under the same folder as the forged e-sign. Alana called later that weekend. She said the e-signature violation could be challenged, that my father and brother might have to repay the line or face an audit. She warned me not to confront them yet, to let the system handle the noise. I thanked her, closed my eyes, and thought of the phrase Bradley had used in his text. "You are family" in his mouth. It meant ownership in mine. It meant boundary. On Sunday, Denise posted a story of herself arranging wine glasses on a long table. The caption read, "Some people only build things online. Some of us build community." The irony so thick it was almost poetic. I took another screenshot, proof number 24, then logged out. The next morning, the local paper featured a small article on the Dell pilot, my name listed as co-founder, the company name bold, under the header "Bridging Data with Integrity." I smiled at that word, integrity, something I had to grow like muscle. My father did not call, but my mother sent a one-line email saying she hoped I was being careful with publicity, that family names carried weight. I typed back, "Thank you for the reminder." Weight acknowledged. I left it at that. Injustice has a rhythm it repeats until you interrupt it, and interruption is rarely quiet. but mine would be calculated. It would begin with evidence moved through exposure and end with every debt accounted for. My father called the following week, his voice clipped with a formality that pretended to be patience. He said we needed to talk about image and reputation, and how my decisions could reflect on the family name. I listened as he explained that success was fragile, that appearances were everything that even the most loyal friends could turn when gossip began. He paused, then said something that settled like lead in my chest. Do not use our name. If you fail Avery, it damages more than just you. It damages what we built. I asked him what exactly had he built that I could possibly damage. He hesitated and said, legacy. I thought of forged signatures and missing accounts and smiled without sound. Legacy, indeed. I met Alana the next morning at her office downtown, a glass building that felt too clean for the kind of stories it held. She welcomed me in with coffee and a tone that balanced empathy and precision. She reviewed the HELOC documents, the UTMA withdrawals, the fake catering email, everything neatly stored on my encrypted drive. She said, Avery, this is a pattern, and the law recognizes patterns. She explained that recording conversations in Texas was legal with one-party consent. She advised that any future interactions be documented calmly and without reaction. She also said something that stuck. Silence backed by evidence is louder than anger. It creates credibility. I nodded, understanding that every word from now on had to be collected like currency. She promised to draft preliminary letters regarding both financial violations, but urged patience. The system moves slowly. She warned justice crawls. I told her I could wait. When I returned home, the air was thick with August heat, the kind that makes metal shimmer. I sat in the garage for a moment, staring at the keypad that opened the door to the house where my parents would host their pre-party planning. The following day, I typed a new code, something simple but private, and watched the light turn green, confirmation that access was now mine alone, a quiet act of defiance wrapped in digits. The next afternoon, as guests began to arrive early for a walk through, my phone buzzed repeatedly, first from Bradley, then Denise, then my mother, all versions of the same complaint. The garage was not opening. I replied that I would check the system remotely and waited 5 minutes before resetting it. The image of them standing under the Texas sun, dressed in designer clothes, tapping their phones in confusion, filled me with a satisfaction so pure it almost felt like calm. When the doors finally clicked open, my father called immediately asking what happened. I told him perhaps the house needed new batteries. Silence followed, then a curt fine. That evening, I received an email from the event planner. Attached was a PDF of the final guest list for the main celebration. My name was missing. I scrolled through twice to be sure every friend, relative, and business contact neatly arranged except me. My space filled by Denise's cousin, I forwarded the document to Alana. With the subject line documentation, she replied, "Keep collecting." The following day, a courier delivered an envelope from my father containing an old family crest pin and a note. It said, "Remember who you represent." I turned the pin in my hand, cold gold against my fingers, and realized he still believed he could command respect through symbolism while ignoring integrity. I placed it back in the envelope and wrote on the back, "Return to sender, no forwarding address." Maya came by that night with takeout and a knowing look. She said, "Your face says something happened." I handed her the guest list. She read it, then laughed that sharp single sound she had when irony met karma. "They are writing you out of a story that is about to become yours," she said. I told her about Alana, about the recordings, about the letters in progress. She nodded and said, "Let them tighten the rope. They are building their own gallows." It was blunt, but true. At midnight, I sat on the balcony overlooking downtown Austin, the city alive with music and light, and thought about how control had always been their favorite language. Every rule, every correction, every subtle reminder that I owed them my tone, my posture, my choices, and now my silence, but power shifts. When truth has receipts, I whispered that line out loud, testing how it felt to claim it. The word receipts hung in the air like prayer. The next morning, my father texted a single sentence: "Be at the club Sunday morning for brunch. No excuses." I typed back, "I will confirm." Depending on workload, he replied with a period that felt like a threat, the way only parents who mistake authority for affection can manage. Alana's second email arrived later that day, confirming that both UTMA and HELOC records were officially subpoena-ready, meaning any attempt to modify them would trigger review. She wrote, "Remember to stay composed. They often escalate when losing control." I closed my laptop and exhaled the kind of breath that feels like strategy. I had been excluded again, erased again, but every erasure left evidence, and evidence was building momentum, like a tide. You cannot see until it rises under your feet. That night, the rain started before sunset, turning Austin into a sheet of silver, the streets along Congress Avenue shining like liquid glass under the neon lights. I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the reflection of tail lights streak down the road, the sound of water against the glass, steady like a heartbeat. I had been awake since dawn, working through investor revisions, my mind too sharp to rest and too tired to think clearly on the muted TV across the room. A local business segment was playing another young founder, smiling at a launch event. Her story narrated by a voice that used words like vision and resilience. The camera cut to her team, clapping, champagne, popping flashbulbs, firing. I muted the sound completely because the noise inside me was louder. It was the kind that comes when you are close to winning, but still treated like you already lost. I turned off the TV and stared at my reflection in the black screen, half light, half doubt. Maya arrived, drenched, her hair curling against her jacket. She carried tacos and 2 cups of coffee. The smell of cilantro and heat filling the small space, she set everything down and said, without ceremony, "You look like you have been arguing with ghosts," I told her. Maybe I had. She asked if I wanted to talk. I said not yet. She nodded, understanding that silence sometimes meant more than conversation. She opened her laptop and began checking our final documents, her fingers moving fast across the keys. She stopped, briefly looked up and said one thing quietly: "Let truth speak for you. It will sound better than anything you could say." I smiled because it was something my grandmother might have said years ago when I still believed words alone could fix things. The clock ticked closer to midnight, my phone vibrating with notifications from Lumen Bridge servers, preparing for final synchronization. The acquisition meeting was set for Saturday, the same day as the party. I scrolled through the company's secure inbox and saw an unread message from Northbridge Communications, the subject line: confirmation of press release schedule. I clicked it, the first line stating the announcement would go live at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Exactly 30 minutes after my mother's event began, I leaned back, the timing, perfect accidental poetry. My name would appear on every business feed across the state, right as they lifted their first glasses. I closed my eyes for a second, not from satisfaction, but relief that truth sometimes knows when to arrive. Outside, the rain intensified, sheets of water sweeping past the street lamps below. I picked up my phone, opened the smart home app for my father's house, and adjusted the thermostat to eco mode. The screen displayed a gentle confirmation temperature, reduced 15 degrees, at precisely 8 p.m. during the height of their dinner. I imagined the hum of their conversation, slowing the shiver, creeping through silk dresses, the sudden scramble for control of a system. They thought, only they owned. It was childish, maybe, but cathartic in the way small rebellions always are. I turned the phone face down and exhaled. Maya handed me a taco and asked what the plan was. After signing day, I said I wanted to buy silence. She laughed and said, "You already did. You bought freedom. They do not know it yet." I asked if she thought my family would ever apologize. She said probably not, but they will adjust to your absence, which might be the same thing. I nodded, the air heavy with the smell of wet pavement and burnt coffee. The rain eased for a moment, enough for us to hear sirens in the distance. Austin on a Friday night, full of stories overlapping mine, invisible among thousands. I looked at Maya and said, "Sometimes I wonder if revenge is just another way of remembering," she said maybe, "but if remembering gets you free." then it is worth it. We ate in silence, the sound of rain returning softer now like applause from far away. I opened the laptop once more, checked the figures, the contracts, the names and dates, everything aligned the way it was supposed to. I scrolled through my archive folder where every insult, every email, every forged document was saved, labeled and dated. It no longer felt like evidence of pain, but like architecture, the foundation of something unshakable. I told Maya that sometimes survival looks boring. Spreadsheets, emails, silence. She said boring is safe, boring is peace. When she left later that night, the streets were slick mirrors. I stood by the window again. The city lights refracted through the water droplets until the view blurred into color and movement. My reflection faint but resolute. I thought of my father's words about failure, about names, about legacy, and realized legacy was not something you inherit. It is something you build when no one is looking. I turned off the lamp and let the room go dark except for the soft glow of my laptop, where the countdown timer to 6 p.m. flickered like a pulse. The storm outside easing into quiet, the kind that comes before everything changes. The Driscoll Hotel lobby smelled of polished wood and old confidence, the kind of scent that clings to history and money. At 5:30, the marble floors gleamed under chandeliers, and my name waited on a small gold plaque outside the conference suite. Clara Whitfield, the CEO of Northbridge, stood by the window, her posture straight, her tone brisk as she extended her hand. "Avery, congratulations. This is the kind of partnership that reshapes markets," she said. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe it might reshape something inside me, too. The contract folders were arranged in two neat stacks, one labeled Primary Acquisition, $240 million, and the other earn-out $40 million contingent on milestones numbers that looked unreal until you remembered what they cost, 10 years of doubt, quiet persistence, humiliation disguised as advice. I signed each page, my initials steady, as if I had been training for this exact moment. Clara smiled and said the press team is ready for the 6 o'clock release. She did not know that 6 o'clock was the hour my family's party would begin, that the timing was a kind of fate disguised as scheduling. After the signatures were sealed, champagne arrived, glasses clinked. The photographer asked for a picture of me and Clara in front of the company logo. I posed with the practiced calm of someone who had learned to smile through being underestimated. Clara leaned closer and said, "Enjoy your evening. You've earned a rest." I told her I planned to keep it quiet. She laughed the soft laugh of someone who assumed quiet meant humility, not strategy. By 5:50, I stepped out into the fading daylight of downtown Austin, the heat finally breaking the air thick with the smell of rain and city dust. I took a cab back to my apartment, where the blinds were half drawn. The silence immediate, I poured water into a glass and sat on the couch, the TV muted in front of me at 5:59. The first alert pinged on my phone. The official press release live across every network. I scrolled through headlines. Northbridge acquires Lumen Bridge for $240 million, local founder Avery Stone, to remain in advisory role, my photo. Above the fold, I let the phone buzz against my palm as the messages poured in. Colleagues, investors, journalists, and somewhere buried among them, missed calls from home. At 6:15, I opened the utility app that still listed my parents' address, and one by one, I ended the auto pays for electricity, water, and internet, each with a polite confirmation email sent to their registered account. I had notified them 30 days earlier of the change. They had ignored it. Now the system would not the cancellations processed quietly, the perfect echo of their earlier exclusions. Outside, thunder rolled low over the city, the sky tinted with the last gray of dusk. I sat back on the couch, the phone vibrating nonstop. 9:30, CNBC picked up the story. A live segment titled, "Local Tech Visionary Closes Landmark Deal." The host called it a new era for female entrepreneurs in Texas, the ticker at the bottom looping my name. And the company, like it had always belonged there. I did not smile. I only watched the anchor say my name correctly 3 times in a row. Near midnight, I received a text from Maya, a screenshot of the news homepage, every outlet running the same headline. I replied simply, "We did it," she wrote back, "No, you did it at 12:01. The Austin Chronicle published its own piece quoting Northbridge CEO Clara Whitfield, praising my leadership and my ability to stay under radar until the right moment, the irony so exact it almost felt scripted. I closed the laptop then and opened a different file. The trust agreement titled, "Still Here, an Irrevocable Structure Transferring My Post-Tax Equity into Long-Term Holdings," including a donor-advised fund of $5 million to support women in tech education. I signed it digitally the same night, ensuring that even if they tried, they could never touch this legacy. The city outside was quiet again, lights blinking across the skyline like slow heartbeats. I thought of my mother's face when she would see the headline during her toast, thought of my father's controlled smile cracking under questions, thought of Bradley's forced laugh and Denise's frozen hand on her glass. I did not need to witness it. Their reactions were the applause I no longer required. I turned off my phone, placed it face down on the table, and whispered a single line to the dark, "Let truth answer for me." It sounded like closure. Not victory, but something gentler, something permanent. The kind of peace you cannot buy, only earn. At precisely 6:30, the Barton Creek Country Club glowed with its usual soft amber light, the kind meant to flatter faces and hide tension beneath crystal chandeliers. The guests had already gathered in the lounge. Their laughter light and rehearsed the screens above the bar tuned to the evening business recap. The anchor smiling as she introduced a headline about a record-breaking acquisition in Austin. For a moment, no one connected the name on the screen to the family seated below until my photograph appeared against the Northbridge logo. The caption reading, "Local entrepreneur Avery Stone closes $240 million deal." Within seconds, the room shifted, whispers spreading like static across linen tables. Someone said softly, "Is that their daughter?" Someone else asked, "Why isn't she here?" Another voice louder said, "She owns that 16-unit complex in East Austin, doesn't she?" The murmur swelled into a low collective hum that no music could drown out. My mother sat frozen her wine. Untouched, my father's jaw tightening with the slow awareness of losing control. Across the club, the television flickered, once then dimmed the lights overhead, pulsing as the automated payment cut their electricity plan. For the first time in years, the hum of the air conditioning faded into silence. The Wi-Fi signal dropped. Guests began looking around, pulling out phones, none of which connected. My father called for the manager, his voice sharp with authority that no longer landed. The manager apologized, saying the account showed unpaid status, the timing so exact it seemed theatrical. I had planned it legally, a simple lapse of autopay that echoed louder than any argument. My mother's phone rang once, twice. Then again, she picked it up, her hands shaking Avery. Her voice small. "Are you seeing what they are saying on TV?" "Yes," I said. "Are you all right?" "I am." She whispered the noise of confused guests rising behind her, people asking questions about me, about the company, about why I was absent. My father snapping at staff in the background. She asked Avery, "Are you okay?" I told her I was more than okay and then quietly said, "Now you only need to believe the truth." She started to speak again, but I ended the call gently, leaving the silence between us as answer. The anchor's voice continued from every phone still streaming the segment, the reporter describing Lumen Bridge's growth, quoting Clara Whitfield praising the innovation, calling it a once-in-a-decade success. Bradley's friends stared across the table, unable to find the right expression. Denise pressed her napkin against her wrist, like she could stop time by staying still. My father sat down heavily, his expression half disbelief, half calculation, trying to rewrite the story already printed on every device in the room. A moment later, one of his business partners, a man named Harlan who had known him for 30 years, received an alert on his phone. He read the headline twice, then raised his head. "Thomas," he said loudly, "why was Avery not invited to her own mother's celebration?" The words cut through the hum. the entire lounge pausing to listen. My father's mouth opened, but no words came. Harlan tilted his phone, showing the screen where my name and photograph filled the frame. He repeated the question softer. "Now, why didn't you mention she built that company?" The silence that followed felt almost holy. My mother's eyes filled not with tears, but with something like recognition. The dawning understanding of what pride feels like when it is no longer borrowed. I imagined the room as I sat miles away, my apartment quiet, except for the steady rain outside the headlines, still updating every half hour. CNBC releasing a feature clip. My face illuminated by soft studio light. I could almost see them there. Each guest replaying years of casual dismissals, each whisper turning inward. My father realizing that the story he had controlled for decades was dissolving in real time. Back at Barton Creek, a waiter tripped on the edge of the darkened room, the champagne tray crashing against marble, the sound startling everyone. Bradley stood finally muttering that it was a misunderstanding, that deals like that were often exaggerated. One of his colleagues said with a smirk, "CNBC does not exaggerate." Thomas looked at him with the cold authority of a man who suddenly remembered what losing respect feels like. My mother tried to gather her composure, thanking guests for coming, pretending the evening could still continue, but the rhythm was gone. Every smile forced, every toast. Hollow, someone in the corner said softly, "I can't believe they told us she was struggling." I turned on the television in my apartment, the same broadcast filling the room, and for a long moment I let it play, not out of vanity, but closure. The kind of vindication that arrives quietly after years of being doubted. Maya texted me a single word, karma. I typed back, "Not karma, just accounting." When the night ended, the Barton Creek staff escorted guests out under flickering emergency lights, the hum of backup generators, faint the banner behind the podium, still displaying the words, "Celebrating Legacy," a phrase that now hung like irony in the air. My mother later said in a message that everyone left early, that even Denise avoided her eyes, that my father drove home in silence. I did not reply. Some truths do not need witnesses, they only need to unfold. By Sunday morning, the aftermath had begun to spread like slow fire across every circle that once praised my father. His longtime associates started withdrawing quietly one by one. First came a call from Harlan saying the pending land deal in Round Rock would be postponed indefinitely, citing concerns about publicity. Then another partner forwarded a legal notice ending a shared venture my father had built on reputation alone. He read the emails at the breakfast table, pale and silent. My mother asking what happened, he said nothing, just bad timing, but even his voice lacked conviction. The collapse had its own rhythm, and I watched it unfold from a distance like weather I did not need to control. Online, the storm was harsher. The news cycle had already moved from admiration to curiosity, reporters digging into the Stone family name and finding old posts where Bradley mocked small businesses, calling founders hobbyists. Screenshots surfaced of his comments, about me the one with the pedicab photo and the caption, "Everyone starts somewhere, but some never leave it by noon." It was reposted hundreds of times. His firm issued a statement distancing itself from personal remarks, and by evening his contract for a new client evaporated. The irony, almost tender, he called my mother, shouting that I had ruined his life. She told him to calm down and then called me, asking if I could do something to help. I said I already had. I had done nothing. That afternoon, Alana Reed sent her official demand letter to my father by certified courier, the document precise and calm, requesting full restitution of the $42,700 from the UTMA account, plus resolution of the $95,000 HELOC misuse within 12 months. Failure to comply would trigger civil proceedings. She copied both Bradley and the family accountant, every word surgical. I read the draft twice, admiring its tone, measured, not vindictive, just factual, like a mirror held too close for comfort. She texted later, saying it would be delivered by Monday morning, and added quietly, Truth sends, invoices too, I wrote back, thank you. I spent the rest of the day tying small knots of closure mini tasks that signaled endings. I logged into the fitness club account, where Denise had been an authorized user since my old family plan days, and removed her access. The next billing cycle would hit her card directly. A minor inconvenience, but poetic. It felt like a single quiet correction after years of unchecked assumptions. Near dusk, my father called, his voice clipped and breathless, accusing me of sabotaging their finances. Again, he said the electric bill was overdue. The late fee had doubled, that I should have warned them. I told him I had sent formal notice 30 days earlier, the email attached with a timestamp. He went silent, the sound of papers shuffling in the background as he searched for evidence that would not appear. He muttered, "You enjoy this, don't you?" I said I enjoy clarity. He hung up without replying. By night, the headlines had shifted from my company to the consequences of exposure, the story now labeled "The Stone Silence Unraveling," featuring anonymous sources from the business community speculating on how arrogance blinds the privileged. My mother did not leave the house that evening. Neighbors saw the lights off before 10. I imagined her sitting by the window, holding her phone, unsure whether to call or to let the quiet stretch. She would not know that the quiet was a gift space for reflection, not punishment. Maya came over with dinner again. We ate in front of the muted TV, watching the crawl of new headlines. I told her it felt strange to win by standing still. She said, "It is not winning, it is correction. You simply stopped paying the emotional tax." I thought about that phrase, emotional tax, and realized how accurate it was. Every boundary unpaid becomes a bill later collected. Around midnight, I opened my email one more time to check the confirmation receipts for the demand letter. It had been signed, delivered, acknowledged my father's signature, neat at the bottom. I exhaled slowly. Not triumph, just release. I closed the laptop and stared out at the city lights, each one flickering against the dark like punctuation after a long sentence unfinished, but ending in truth. Thomas showed up 2 days later, the way storms do quietly at first, pretending to be rain before turning to thunder. He knocked on the glass door of my office, his reflection older, smaller than I remembered his posture, half apology, half command. He said we needed to talk about cleaning up the family story about damage control, about how a few phone calls could repair perception. If I cooperated, I let him speak until the word cooperate repeated itself like an echo. He said, "Avery, you could help by keeping certain details. Private investors get nervous if they sense family conflict." He called it protecting everyone. But his eyes darted toward the floor when he asked for an advance. Just until things stabilize a bridge loan, he said. I almost laughed at the symmetry of it. Him asking for the kind of lifeline he had once refused me. I asked what he was offering in return. He hesitated, then said, "I can make this all go away if you stop those lawyers from digging deeper." I told him nothing ever goes away. It just waits in a drawer until someone opens it. I offered him 2 options, carefully measured. The first, a public apology to be given in writing and read aloud at a family meeting, plus full repayment of both the UTMA and HELOC within the schedule Alana had set. The second, if he refused, would be immediate civil filing and notification to the compliance board regarding his misuse of electronic signatures. He stared at me as if I had spoken another language, said, "Avery, this is family." I said, "Exactly, and family should understand terms better than strangers." He began pacing his shoes, leaving faint marks on the polished floor, saying, "You would destroy your own blood over a few mistakes." I said, "No, I am cleaning the stain you left." He sat down, finally, shoulders sagging, hands gripping the edge of the chair, then muttered, "You always had to win, didn't you?" I said, "No, I just stopped losing." He asked, "What if I cannot pay it all at once?" I said, "That is why schedules exist." He asked, "What if I apologize privately?" I said, "That defeats the purpose." He stood abruptly, calling it humiliation, calling me ungrateful, calling this the reason I had no one. I let him speak until the air emptied of excuses. Then I handed him a small box, the one he had left on my desk years ago when he took the UTMA papers inside, now sealed with a new note taped across it. Reading, "Do not remove it," contained the original statements and Alana's demand letter. He looked at the label, then at me, and said, "You think this makes you strong?" I said, "No, it makes me honest. Strength is something different." His face flushed with a mixture of anger and shame. He pointed toward me, saying, "You are nothing without this family." I told him I had already proven the opposite. He grabbed the box, slammed it once on the table, and said, "Do not ever call me father." Again, I said I stopped long before today. Then he turned and left the sound of the door closing sharp enough to echo down the hall. I stood still for a long time. After breathing in the quiet, the air heavy with the smell of rain carried from his coat, and for a moment felt not victory but a kind of release. The slow exhale of years compressed into a single word: no. When he reached the parking lot, I watched through the window as he stopped under the streetlight. His shoulders bent. His hand gripping the box, he looked like a man carrying evidence of himself, and maybe he was. I knew. He would tell my mother I was cold, that I had chosen pride over compassion. She would believe him at first, but then she would read the documents. She would see the numbers, not accusations, and perhaps that would be enough. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and drafted an email to Alana, summarizing the meeting, every word time-stamped, every line factual, not emotional. She replied a few minutes later, simply saying, "Good, you handled it with precision. Next step is theirs." I closed the computer and felt the silence settle again, deep and final, the kind that comes not from distance, but from boundaries drawn in ink. Marilyn decided to host a smaller gathering 2 weeks later, choosing the Driscoll's 1886 Cafe, a place that carried the quiet grandeur of old Austin, the kind of space where apologies might finally sound like truth. She sent the invitations herself, handwritten notes that said family meeting casual attire, her handwriting slightly uneven. I knew she meant peace, not confrontation. And still, I arrived early, unsure of what forgiveness might look like. In daylight, the cafe smelled of coffee and butter, the hum of voices low against the clink of china when they entered. My father looked thinner, his confidence trimmed to silence my mother's eyes. Red but resolute. Bradley walked beside Denise, both avoiding my gaze. They took their seats across from me, the long table polished like a mirror. Thomas cleared his throat, then unfolded a piece of paper, his voice shaking as he read, "I owe my daughter restitution and respect for both the financial missteps and the personal harm caused by assumption and pride." He paused, glanced up, met my eyes, then continued. "I will fulfill the repayment schedule for the UTMA and the HELOC in full over the next 12 months. As agreed upon." He set the paper down and reached for the pen beside it, signing the acknowledgement Alana had prepared. The sound of ink scratching paper felt heavier than any courtroom sentence. It was the sound of accountability at last. My mother reached for his hand, but he did not take it. She whispered "thank you" to me so quietly it almost vanished beneath the music. Playing overhead, Bradley stared at his coffee cup, the reflection of the chandelier trembling across the surface. Denise looked between us, her face a study in discomfort when the silence grew too long. I finally said, "There is no need to retell the past. Just learn to respect the future." It was not a declaration, just a fact, something that felt both boundary and benediction. My father nodded once, still unable to look at me directly. I folded the signed papers, placed them back into the folder, and slid it into my bag. With care, the room exhaled a kind of uneasy relief, the way people breathe after weathering a storm. The waiter arrived with refills, the sound of cups against saucers. Breaking the tension, Denise suddenly spoke, her voice small but urgent. "Avery, could we talk after? Maybe privately," I said, about what she fidgeted. Said, "I have been thinking about that post I made months ago. It keeps resurfacing. People have seen it, and I wondered if you might help me remove it." I looked at her for a long moment and said quietly, "The truth is a better teacher than deletion." She flushed pale and turned away. Bradley reached for her hand, but she pulled back, embarrassment coloring the air. I stood slowly, the chairs scraping softly against the floor, thanked my mother for organizing this, and said one thing before leaving. "I do not need anyone's apology. I only need consistency." She nodded, tears in her eyes, whispering, "We will try." I told her trying is the start, not the end. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, scattering light across Congress Avenue. I walked past the old stone pillars of the hotel, the city humming with its usual rhythm, people rushing to meetings, unaware that somewhere inside a family had finally learned how silence feels when it becomes justice in motion. I stopped by the curb and took a slow breath, the weight that had lived in my chest for years, easing into something that felt like balance. Maybe not happiness, but peace, the kind that does not ask for permission. The months that followed unfolded with a calm I had never known before, the kind that lives in silence. Not absence, my days were no longer filled with reaction, but rhythm. The penthouse in downtown Austin, quiet and filled with light. The city stretching wide from the glass walls, the view a soft, constant reminder of distance earned $3.2 million in square footage that did not define worth, but reflected boundaries. The 16-unit complex in East Austin, managed by a local firm, produced steady returns, $6.8 million in value that felt more like security than status. The land in Bastrop, 7.5 acres of oak and wildflowers, a space where I sometimes drove to breathe the air uncluttered by memory. The donor-advised fund of $5 million sat untouched except for scholarships named after my grandmother. Small grants sent to women starting companies from rented apartments where ambition was louder than applause. Another $2.4 million invested in early stage founders, the kind who build not for recognition but for freedom. Every number a marker, not of wealth, but of reclamation. My father sent the first repayment exactly on schedule, the bank confirmation arriving with perfect precision, no note attached, no apology needed. The next installments arrived the same way, punctual, professional. Our relationship settling into what Alana had once called polite distance, necessary space disguised as civility. We spoke only through email, each exchange short, factual signed, formally respect, maintained through boundaries. Not affection. My mother visited once every few weeks, bringing small gifts, homemade cookies, framed photographs. She said she had started attending a local support group for parents, learning accountability, the words awkward but sincere. She looked around my home, at the art, the plants, the quiet. She sat on the couch and asked softly, "Are you happy?" I said, "I am peaceful." She nodded like she understood the difference, then asked if I still spoke to Bradley. I told her no, but that forgiveness did not require conversation. She smiled a little, saying that maybe someday he would see the lesson in losing comfort. I said maybe someday I would stop needing him to. On the wall near my desk hung the framed CNBC article from the night of the announcement. The headline, clean and bright, beside it, the signed repayment schedule, each installment crossed off in my handwriting, the juxtaposition of public recognition and private restitution, a timeline of what truth can repair. I sometimes caught myself looking at it while working late, the city lights flickering through the window, and thought about how everything I had built began in silence, how every boundary drew itself from pain until it turned into structure. Maya still ran operations at Lumen Bridge. Now a Northbridge division, we spoke often, but about ideas, not survival. She once told me that quiet justice is the sound of your own life getting louder. I understood it now. On weekends, I visited the Bastrop property, walking the perimeter under the sun, the wind moving through the grass, like water. Sometimes I imagined my grandmother there, sitting on the porch, reminding me that money fixes numbers, not hearts, that dignity is the only inheritance you can protect without lawyers. I repeated those words aloud, once letting them settle in the air, then wrote them in a notebook beside the phrase, "Truth needs no audience." It was not revenge that had rebuilt me. It was the stillness that followed. When autumn came, Austin cooled the city softer in tone, the skyline familiar, not demanding. I began hosting small dinners for friends, entrepreneurs, artists, teachers, people who spoke without pretense. We talked about boundaries as if they were blueprints about the quiet between success and self-respect. I never mentioned my family unless someone asked. And when they did, I said only that peace came at the price of letting go of old roles. No more savior, no more scapegoat, just an adult who learned to stay still when provoked. One evening after my mother left, I stood by the window holding a cup of tea, looking at the framed article, the reflection of the city lights across the glass. I whispered to no one. Money does not bring peace. Truth does boundaries do. And the choice to stay silent when you have already said enough, that is freedom. The words sounded final like a prayer. I placed the cup down and let the silence fill the room, the way water fills a hollow space complete without overflow.